If your landscape photos feel off and you can't figure out why, this is probably the reason. I've spent the last decade helping photographers improve their editing, and these 7 mistakes, I see them everywhere. Some will completely destroy your image quality. Others, they make your photos look fake, flat, or just forgettable. And the worst part, most photographers don't even know they're doing them. So let's fix that, starting with the one that I see in almost every edit I review. So I like to call this global edits on a local problem. And this is an absolutely fantastic example of it. If I come up here to the develop module, you'll see that I have the shadows cranked up to +100, which is a very common thing that I see. But what's most interesting is the reason why this was done to this photograph. So if I reset this to 0, you can see that all of this area down here is very, very dark. So the reason I brought this up to +100 was to show a lot of that detail right through there. But what's happening is if you look all through here, and all throughout here, by bringing this up to +100, you're also impacting all of that area. Basically, I'm impacting every bit of shadows in this photograph. And when I bring this to +100, it really reduces how much nice light was kind of coming through here. You can kind of see a little bit of the light still right through here, but it's not nearly as impactful when it was like this. You can really see that light stand out. Bringing it to +100 on the shadows really reduces how beautiful that light actually is. So here's a better solution to this. Let me just reset this to 0. Maybe we'll just bring it up just a touch here. I'm gonna come up here, I'm gonna create a mask. Let's do let's say a linear gradient. We're just gonna drag this from the bottom all the way up to the top right here, covering almost all of those pine trees in the foreground right through there. And then let's bring up the shadows here to a very realistic amount, maybe just about right here, nothing like that, but to a point about right here, I think looks okay. And it did not affect this area right through here nearly as much as when I used a global edit. You can see that it's pretty much only impacting the trees in the foreground, which is exactly what I want. And it left the light in the foreground completely untouched. So global edits on a local problem is something that I see absolutely constantly. Here's another huge one, and it is basically just over-edited skies. This is a fantastic example of that right here. Let me come up here. You can see that there's a bunch of different masks here, and this is the sky mask. And as I toggle this on and off, you can see what a dramatic difference that is, and it is completely overdone. And if you look at some of these adjustments through here, let me click on the sky mask. You can see that clarity to 75. You know, yes, adding some clarity to the sky will definitely kind of bring out some drama, but it's super easy to go overboard, and 75 is definitely overboard. Usually if I'm gonna add any clarity to the sky, it's somewhere between that 20 and 30 mark. Dehaze at 50 is probably a little high too, so I'm gonna maybe bring that back a little bit. Clarity and dehaze definitely does a good job, but when it needs to be done very subtly when it comes to a sky. And I think that something like this looks much more realistic. Let me just toggle this on and off. That, still a very dramatic difference, but it wasn't just so dark and so crunchy. But over-edited skies is a very, very common thing that I see on images that I review. Now, the next one is something that I call toxic greens. In landscape photography, greens and maybe blues might be the most common colors in this genre of photography. And it's very easy to go overboard on the greens. And this is a fantastic example from the Smoky Mountains. If I come down here, and as you can see, nothing has been done to the vibrance or saturation. But if I come down to the color mixer, you can see that the green hue has been shifted more towards green. If you look at saturation, it's been bumped a little bit. Luminance has been bumped a little bit as well. But I think you'd agree that none of these values are moved in any kind of extreme fashion. I mean, nothing is like +80 or +100. They're very subtle moves. So it's very easy to get to that toxic green look. Something more realistic here is, let me bring this luminance down a little bit. Let's bring this saturation maybe down into the negative value, because if you've been in the Smoky Mountains in the spring, the greens really come alive anyway, so you have to be careful with these. And then the hue might shift them a little bit more towards green, but nothing to the effect or to the point that it was. And now when I toggle this on and off, you can see that that's definitely more realistic. It's just boosts the overall brightness value of the greens and the saturation just a little bit, but to a point to where it is still very realistic. Another super common one is something that I call texture abuse. This is done all the time. I used to hammer this one to death. This is a good example of it here. When I look at it like this, I can still tell that this image is a little bit crunchy, but when you zoom in, you can really tell how crunchy it is. Look at all that noise that's right through there. And when I come down to the effects section, I'm sorry, not the effects section, to the basics section, you can see that texture at +30, that clarity at +50, those are, when you have those values in conjunction with one another, you're gonna get a little over crunchy of a photograph. Let me zoom back out here. Let's take this clarity, let's cut it in half to maybe 25. Let's cut this texture in half to maybe around 10 or 15, maybe 10. I'm actually gonna bring the clarity back a little bit as well. And now this photograph looks a little bit more smooth through here. You can still see a little bit of noise, but that's not because of the clarity and texture. That's just because of the higher ISO that was used for this photograph. But when you look at it like this, the image definitely has a much more smooth quality to it. Now for the fifth one, and this is, I mean, these are all the 7 most common that I see, but this one is one that I think once you see it, it's kind of hard to unsee again. And it's something that I called halo and ghost light. This is a great example from Iceland. When you look at the photograph like this, it looks okay. You know, if you kind of analyze the scene, it's kind of difficult to see what the real editing mistake is here. But if you look up here on the ridge line, you can already kind of see that halo or that ghost light. And then when I zoom in here, you can really see it. The halo is literally the edge right through here. But then that halo a lot of times kind of creates this, what I call ghost light. This is kind of like this glowing look along that halo. And it's most common to see that when you have a very, you know, definitive line, like a mountain's edge against a sky up here. And what's really causing that is if I come up here to the mask section, let's come down to the sky. Look at the adjustment here. The sky has been brought down, the exposure has been brought down so much. And look as I toggle this on and off. It's just way too big of an adjustment. If I bring that exposure back a little bit here, maybe not take the highlights to -100. Let's see what else was done here. Clarity at 65. You know, we talked about this in the earlier part of the video. That's definitely a very high value. So let's bring that down to maybe 20 here. And now when I look up here, you can kind of see that that halo has been removed a little bit. It's still there just a touch, but it's something that you should really pay attention to. Once this was brought to my attention on some of my photos, I never really noticed it before, but I started looking back at previous edits, and I can definitely see that halo or that ghost light appear in many photographs. So definitely something to pay attention to. Once again, it usually happens when you bring down the exposure of the sky to a very high or to a very low value, and then you have a mountain ridge or maybe trees in the back or in the foreground of that sky. That's where you start to see a lot of those halos. But if you zoom into that area and see if you see halos or see if you see that ghost light, that's something that is a good kind of leading indicator that you should say, hey, pause for a minute. You might want to adjust whatever adjustment you made to that sky or to that mountain or the trees because it's creating halos. And as you can see here, it's still there, very subtle, but it's something that it looks much better than it did before. That is for sure. Now this next one, and I think this is number 6, is something I call unrealistic color temperatures. And this is super common as well. This is a good example from Italy. When you look at it like this, you don't really see much. I mean, it definitely looks a little bit warm. And now that I know what the correct white balance for this photograph is, in my eyes, I can tell how warm this actually is. Going to the opposite side of that, to the cooler side, this is the cooler image right here. And that definitely has that kind of moody look. I think a lot of times, I know I used to do this, I wanted to make that moody, dramatic photograph. So a lot of times I leaned on the color temperature and reduced it more to the cooler side to create that moody, dramatic feeling. But you can definitely go overboard. This right here is a more realistic color temperature for this photograph. Once again, this is the overly warm version. This is the overly cool version. And this is the more realistic one. So unrealistic color temperature is something that's very common and it can kind of make your photo look a little bit fake. So just being very aware of the color balance or the white balance that you have selected for a particular image is very important. And I think this looks much better than overly cool or overly warm. This is a more realistic color balance. Now, last and certainly not least is something that I call editing blind. Basically no vision, no goal with a photograph. And this is something that really impacted me for years is because I would start to edit a photograph and I would just start to edit it from a very technical perspective. Bring up shadows, reduce highlights, reduce exposure, bring up the white point, bring up the black point, whatever the case may be. But editing with no goal is definitely a major problem. This is a good example of this from the Blue Ridge Mountains and from the Smoky Mountains a few months ago. When I look at this photograph, I can tell, and this is the almost finished version of it, but when I looked at this image, I didn't want to just go through from a technical perspective in editing this photo. I knew that I wanted to reduce the exposure of the sky. I wanted to kind of make the sun rays a little bit more, prominent perhaps, or maybe I wanted to bring up the shadows in the foreground and maybe put a vignette on the image to really draw the viewer's eye into the center. But these are all things that you think about before, or you should think about, before you really start to moving sliders around. Basically, what is your goal? What is the vision you have for this photograph? Where do you want the viewer's eye to go? Do you want them to see the foreground? Do you want them to avoid the edges? Do you want them to see the background? Whatever the case may be, just pausing for a minute on the raw file and just think about, what do you want what do you want the end vision for this image to look like? And this is where I was basically at for this photograph. I'm not completely done with it, but I really like the way that it's coming together. But I think having a vision for a photograph, let me come up here to the library module so I can put these both on the screen at the exact same time. Having an idea of what you want to do with a photograph, I think is very, very important. So having that vision, having that goal, and the best way to determine that is just to stare at that raw file for just a couple minutes. No, I'm sorry, maybe not even a couple minutes, maybe 30 seconds, and just ask yourself, where do you want the viewer's eye to go? Where do you want the viewer's eye to avoid? Do you want to emphasize this area over this area, or the corners, or whatever the case may be? Just pause for a minute, figure out what that end goal is, and then execute that end goal from an editing perspective. So those are the 7 most common editing mistakes that I see, that I have seen over the last 10 years. A lot of these are common mistakes that I used to do. A lot of these are common mistakes that some of my clients would do, or would commit, if you will, in a lot of the one-to-one virtual editing sessions that I do. So I wanted to kind of put this video together of the greatest hits editing mistakes that I have seen over the past 10 years, and I hope that it was helpful. If you have any questions about anything covered here today, please leave those in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to get back in touch with you as soon as humanly possible. And if you enjoyed this week's video, if you could, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already, and as always, I really do appreciate you carving out a little bit of time to spend it with me here today, and I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.